The morning light was shining through the old curtains in my bedroom. I opened my eyes and habitually reached for the empty half of the bed. 5 years had passed, and I still looked for Edith in the morning. They say it gets easier with time. Nonsense, it just gets more familiar. My name is Chester Blackwell. I'm 74 years old, and I live alone in the house Edith and I bought 46 years ago. Back then, it was an old Victorian house with a leaky roof and creaky floorboards. It wasn't the most prosperous neighborhood, but it was all we could afford. Now, Old Town is one of the most expensive places in Columbus, and my house is valued at 6 zeros. Funny how life changes. I struggled to get up, feeling my joints aching. Arthritis has been my faithful companion for the past few years. Edith always made me take fish oil and glucosamine. With her passing, I had abandoned the habit, as I had done so many others. There was no one to remind me. My morning routine is unchanged. First a cup of strong black coffee, then peanut butter toast, a run through the newspaper headlines. Yes, I still subscribe to a paper newspaper, unlike these modern smarties with their news apps. Then I put on an old tweed jacket and go out for a walk. The print shop I founded 50 years ago is now owned by a corporation that bought it for good money. I only agreed to the sale after Edith's diagnosis. The money didn't help us then, but it did provide us with a comfortable old age. Sometimes I miss the smell of paint and the hum of the printing presses, but eventually one gets used to everything. Today I decided to stop by our old print shop just to say hello to the remaining employees. There are only 3 of my former team left there: Perkins, Lorraine, and old Patrick. The rest have been laid off or replaced by young professionals with graphic design degrees. Chester! Patrick, my longtime friend and former chief mechanic, brightened when he saw me in the doorway. Sutton, what brings you here? I wanted to see if you'd ruined my brainchild yet, I grumbled, but my smile broke through the contrived sternness. We talked for a while, and I didn't notice how the time flew by. Patrick invited me to lunch at the cafe across the street, a small diner where we'd often eaten before. It turned out that his oldest son had recently gotten a promotion at his IT company, and his youngest was about to start college. How's your Rourke doing? Patrick asked, sipping his coffee. Still at the same finance company? I nodded, feeling a familiar sense of pride mixed with anxiety. Rourke, my only son, had always been a mystery to me. A clever boy, he had shown a remarkable aptitude for math and analysis since childhood, but he was withdrawn and insecure. Edith said it was because of my strictness, but I just wanted him to grow up to be a strong man. He seems to be doing fine, I answered. He calls once a month, talking about his work, about his new projects. How's his personal life? Patrick winked slyly. You haven't found a fiancée yet? I sighed. At 40, it's time to think about a family, but he's all about the numbers and charts. When I was his age, Rourke was already 15. Strangely enough, the thought of a possible daughter-in-law gave me mixed feelings. On the one hand, I wanted Rourke to be happy. On the other, I was afraid that marriage would further alienate him from me. After Edith's death, our relationship became particularly strained. He tried to convince me to move into a nursing home. For your own good, Dad. I was so angry at the time that I didn't speak to him for 2 months. When I returned home after seeing Patrick, I felt a familiar emptiness. The large 4-bedroom house that had once been the sound of children's laughter and music from Edith's records now seemed like a crypt of memories. I walked through the rooms, absent-mindedly adjusting the pictures on the walls. Here were Edith and me on our wedding day. Here was little Rourke on his first bicycle. Here were the 3 of us on the Michigan coast. Rourke and I had a complicated history. He was always more drawn to his mother, the soft, understanding Edith, who could listen to him babble for hours about dinosaurs and spaceships. I, on the other hand, was always busy with printing, and when I came home, demanded discipline and order. My military service in Vietnam had left its mark on me, and I knew no other way to educate him than through strictness and discipline. When Rourke went to college and left to study in Chicago, a wall of misunderstanding grew between us. He rarely came for vacations, preferring to stay with friends or work part-time. After graduation, he took a job with a large financial company and seemed to have forgotten all about his parents. Only Edith could drag him to family dinners on holidays. That changed when Edith got sick. Pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis that sounded like a verdict. Rourke flew in as soon as he found out and stayed with us until the end. During those difficult months, I saw him as a very different person, caring, attentive, willing to do anything for my mother. He and I spent nights at her bedside, alternating with each other, and for the first time in many years, we had a heart-to-heart talk. After the funeral, Rourke stayed for a week, helping me with the paperwork and just being a supportive presence. I thought we had finally found common ground. But then he went back to Chicago, and our communication dwindled again to occasional calls and texts over the holidays. I poured myself a whiskey, a small weakness I allow myself in the evenings, and sat down in my chair by the fireplace. Edith wouldn't have approved. She always said alcohol and blood pressure medication were incompatible. But Edith was gone, and the whiskey helped dull the pain of her absence. My thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. My son's name came up on the screen. "Rourke," I answered, trying to sound cheerful. "Is something wrong? You usually call on Sundays." "Hi, Dad." My son sounded unusually excited. "I've got great news. I wanted to tell you first." I tensed, expecting to hear about a new promotion or a move even farther away from Columbus. "I got married, Dad," Rourke blurted out. "Her name is Brittany, and she's amazing. We met at a corporate event 3 months ago, and, well, it was love at first sight." I felt my insides tighten up. 3 months? My son married a woman he'd only been dating for 3 months and didn't even bother to introduce her to me before the wedding? "You, congratulations, son," I said. "This is really unexpected news." "I know it all happened very quickly." Rourke's voice was impatience mixed with excitement. "But when you know it's the right person, why wait, right? Brittany works in PR. She's so bright, energetic. I'm sure you'll love her." "How can I love someone I've never even met?" I wanted to ask, but I held back. "We want to come to Columbus next weekend to meet you," Rourke continued. "Is that okay with you?" "Of course not," I tried to make my voice sound enthusiastic. "I'd love to meet your wife." Rourke's wife. Those words sounded strange. I'd always imagined that when my son decided to get married, it would be a big event, that I'd be sitting in the front row of the church watching him say his vows, that Edith would be there, furtively wiping away tears of happiness. "Well done." Rourke didn't seem to notice my confusion. "We'll come over Friday night, if it's convenient for you. We have something of a honeymoon. We've taken a vacation for 2 weeks. Friday will be fine." I was already starting to figure out what to buy, what to cook, how to prepare the guest bedroom. "I'll be waiting." After the call, I sat staring into space for a long time. My son, my withdrawn, career-focused Rourke, was suddenly married to a stranger. What do I know about her? Nothing but her name and her profession. What is she like? Does she truly love him, or is it a marriage of convenience? Rourke had never had much luck with women. Too serious, too absorbed in his own inner world. I got up and went to the cabinet where I kept the family photo albums. I pulled out an album of pictures of Rourke from infancy through college graduation. Here he is, 7 years old, showing me his first model airplane. Here's the sulky teenager Edith made me take a picture of before the prom. Here's the graduate, with diploma in hand and an uncertain smile. "What would you say, Edith?" I asked, looking at my wife's picture. "Would you approve of his choice?" I knew what she would say. "Give her a chance, Chester. Don't judge until you get to know her." Edith had always been wiser than I in matters of human relations. With a heavy sigh, I closed the album and looked at the calendar. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to prepare to meet a new chapter in my son's life, and possibly my own. I started preparing for the arrival of Rourke and his newfound wife a few days in advance. I rearranged the linens in the guest bedroom, dusted the bookshelves, and even ordered a cleaning service to clean the entire house. Edith would have been proud of my efforts. I don't usually notice dust and clutter. Friday came unexpectedly quickly. I cooked dinner, a roast from Edith's recipe, her signature apple pie, and bought a bottle of good wine. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about the upcoming meeting. What would this Brittany be like? Would she love my son the way he deserved? At exactly 6 p.m., I heard the sound of a car pulling up. When I looked out the window, I saw a brand new silver Lexus, clearly beyond my son's means with his financial analyst salary. Either he'd gotten a substantial promotion, or the car belonged to his new wife. I opened the door before they could even ring the bell. Rourke looked happy, but a little nervous. He hugged me, and I could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne. He used to use a simple aftershave. "Dad, this is Brittany, my wife." He said the last word as reverently as if he couldn't believe his happiness. I shifted my gaze to the woman standing next to him. Brittany Q, now Blackwell, was a spectacular blonde of about 35, with flawless makeup and a suit that looked like it had just come off the runway at a fashion show. She was smiling, but I noticed immediately that the smile didn't touch her eyes. Cold assessing. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Blackwell." She held out a hand with a perfect manicure. "Rourke has told me so much about you. At last I get to meet the legendary Chester." Her voice sounded like a professional broadcaster's. Rehearsed intonations, deliberate pauses. There was an air of naivete in it that immediately alerted me. But I decided to give her a chance. After all, first meetings are often awkward. "Likewise, Brittany, please come in. Don't just stand in the doorway. Dinner's almost ready." I escorted them into the living room, trying not to show my surprise as Brittany looked around the room with poorly concealed disappointment. Her gaze slid over the old furniture, the collection of books on the shelves, the pictures on the walls, and there was a slight contempt in her eyes. "What an authentic house," she said at last. "So much history in it. How long have you lived here, Mr. Blackwell?" 46 years, I answered proudly. "Edith and I bought it when we were expecting Rourke. It was in a terrible state then, but we fixed it up with our own hands." "You can feel it," Brittany nodded as if she were confirming the diagnosis. "Such a special style." Over dinner, I tried to find out more about Brittany. It turned out that she worked as a PR director for a large pharmaceutical company, had a master's degree in marketing from a prestigious university, and, from what she told me, had a very busy social life. "Rourke and I met at a charity event," she said, elegantly cutting a piece of meat. "His company was one of the sponsors, and I was in charge of the organization. He stood out among all those narcissistic financiers, so modest, so intelligent." Rourke looked at her with adoration, like a boy at an unreachable star. "I've never seen him so, dependent on other people's opinions. My son had always been closed, a little insecure, but independent in his judgment. Now he was always looking for Brittany's approval, watching her reactions, even phrasing himself to please her." "How did you decide to marry so soon?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Brittany and Rourke looked at each other as if they had a secret. "Time doesn't matter when you meet your soulmate," she said with the confidence of a professional speaker. "Besides, at my age, you don't want to spend years testing a relationship. We both know what we want out of life." I noticed her touching her stomach in a characteristic gesture, and I looked questioningly at my son. Rourke blushed but shook his head. "No, this wasn't about an unplanned pregnancy." After dinner, Brittany asked me to show her the house. I walked her through the rooms, telling her the story of each one. To me, the house was a living thing, a repository of memories of happy years with Edith, of Rourke growing up. For Brittany, it was just an old property with outdated renovations. "The bathroom needs a complete remodel," she said, looking at my pride of place, the vintage cast-iron lion's paw bathtub that Edith and I had found at a rummage sale. "And that wallpaper, my God, it belongs in a museum of 70s bad taste." I didn't say anything, though I was seething with indignation. Who was she to judge a house she hadn't lived in for a day? The evening continued in the living room with a glass of wine. Brittany asked me about the print shop, about my years in Vietnam, about what I was doing now, but her questions were calculated rather than sincere. It was as if she were evaluating me the way one evaluates a stock on the stock exchange, whether it's worth investing in or not. When I started to talk about my friends from the local Veterans Club, whom I met once a week, she yawned defiantly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell. We're tired of the road." She rose from the couch with the grace of a photo model. "If you don't mind, we'll go and rest." Rourke obediently followed her, as if on a leash. "Of course, rest. Tomorrow we'll get to know each other." I looked at my son, hoping he would stay a moment longer, but he smiled guiltily and followed my wife. Left alone, I sat in the chair for a long time, reflecting on my first impression. I didn't like Brittany, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a cold calculation behind her flawless facade. But was it just the jealousy of an old man unwilling to share his only son's attention with a stranger? I didn't know the answer. In the morning, I woke up to the unusual sounds of someone cooking breakfast in my house. When I went down to the kitchen, I found Brittany working on the stove. She was dressed in elegant house clothes, her hair in a sloppy bun, but her makeup was already perfect. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell," she exclaimed with feigned joy. "I thought I'd make French toast. Rourke said you liked them." I did like French toast, but she made it look like an illustration from a cooking magazine, perfect, garnished with fresh berries and mint, but tasteless. All for the picture, nothing for the soul, just like Brittany herself. All day long, she'd been doing her best to play the perfect daughter-in-law, interested in my hobbies, offering to help around the house, even trying to go through my collection of old stamps I'd collected over the years. But her eyes betrayed boredom and impatience, and her comments were condescending, as if she were talking to a capricious child rather than a grown man. That evening, as we sat on the veranda, Rourke finally voiced what I suspected was the real purpose of their visit. "Dad, Brittany and I have been talking a lot about the future," he began, glancing nervously at his wife, who nodded approvingly. "And we were thinking, maybe we should move in with you. You know, you're all alone here. It's a big house. You probably need help." I froze, unable to believe my ears. Rourke, who'd barely found time for the last few years to visit, suddenly wanted to move in with me. What was the reason for such concern? I asked directly, looking my son in the eye. He looked embarrassed, but Brittany immediately came to the rescue. "Mr. Blackwell, Rourke and I are genuinely concerned about you." Her voice sounded melodic, like a professional actress. "Living alone in such a large house at your age, it's a risk, and we could help you, keep you healthy, keep you company. Besides," and she paused, "we plan to have children soon. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have your grandchildren growing up with you?" The mention of possible grandchildren was a masterful move. I did dream of grandchildren, a chance to right the wrongs I'd made raising Rourke. But there was something about the offer that made me uneasy. "What about your apartment in Chicago? And your job?" I asked a reasonable question. Rourke lowered his eyes. "You see, Dad, I was laid off 3 months ago. The company was restructuring, and my position was cut. That's it. The sudden marriage, the sudden desire to move, everything fell into place. I've already found a new job here in Columbus," Rourke added quickly. "I start in 2 weeks, and Brittany can work remotely." "So you just don't have a place to live?" I asked bluntly. "Chester!" Brittany was indignant with theatrical pathos. "How can you think that? We're worried about you. We want to be near you. Sure, we could rent or buy a house in Columbus, but wouldn't it be better to join forces? A family has to stick together." I looked at my son, trying to figure out what was really going on in his life. He looked tired and lost, not at all like someone who had recently found family happiness. "Rourke, can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded toward the house. "Alone." Brittany didn't like the idea, but she gave me an understanding smile and said she was going to go freshen up. When we were alone, I asked bluntly, "Son, what's really going on? Why didn't you ever tell me you lost your job? And why the rush to get married and move?" Rourke sighed, and for a moment I saw in him the boy who used to come to me with his problems until he grew up and became distant. "Dad, I really love Brittany. She helped me when everything was falling apart. I was desperate after getting fired, in debt, almost depressed, and she showed up and pulled me out of that hole and offered me the solution to all my problems. Get married and move in with my rich father?" I was being sarcastic. "No, I mean, it wasn't like that," Rourke shook his head. "It was my idea to move in with you. We're really worried about you, and—" He paused, searching for words. "And yes, it will help us get back on our feet. But isn't it bad for us to be close, after all these years apart?" There was truth in what he said. I did miss my son, and the thought of him living in this house again warmed my soul. Maybe I was being too hard on Brittany. Maybe she really loves Rourke and wants to help him. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Give me time." The next few days turned into a bizarre performance. Brittany tried to show her best self by cooking elaborate meals, though I preferred simple food, by suggesting that we freshen up the interior, i.e., throw out anything that reminded me of Edith, by talking about her plans for the garden. though the garden was Edith's pride, and I kept it exactly as she had designed it. Rourke, on the other hand, seemed more and more tense, as if he was afraid I would refuse them. I could see him fawning over Brittany, catching every word she said, and it bothered me. My son had always had an opinion, but now it was as if he'd melted into this woman. The last night before they left, they had to go back to Chicago to settle things before moving. I made a decision. "You can move in," I said over dinner, watching Brittany's eyes light up. "But on one condition, it's my house, and I'll make all the major decisions." "Of course, Mr. Blackwell." Brittany smiled her perfect smile. "We wouldn't think of changing anything without your consent. Didn't we, darling?" Rourke nodded, clearly relieved. "Thanks, Dad. You won't regret it." But looking at the triumphant gleam in Brittany's eyes, I was beginning to doubt my decision. But I was doing it for my son. Maybe a life together will help us to get closer, to restore the relationship that had broken down over the years of separation. And if Brittany really loved him, well, I was willing to try to get along with her. I didn't know then how much I would regret that decision. It had been 3 months since Rourke and Brittany had moved into my house. 3 months that had turned my measured life into a constant struggle to maintain my dignity and space. For the first few weeks, things went relatively smoothly. Brittany showed exemplary politeness, cooked exotic dishes, though I preferred my usual diet, and asked my opinion on various issues. Rourke took a new job, less prestigious than his previous one, but stable. He left early in the morning and returned late at night, leaving me alone with his wife. And that's when the real Brittany began to emerge. Without witnesses, she quickly shed the mask of caring daughter-in-law. The first major conflict was over my office. It was the holy of holies, the room where I spent most of my day reading, working on my memoirs, or just thinking. My books, documents, collections, memorabilia were stored there. One day, returning from an outing, I found the door to the study open wide. Inside, Brittany was commandeering 2 workers who were taking out my old desk, an antique piece I'd worked at all my life. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling a wave of anger rising. "Oh, Chester!" Brittany feigned a look of joyful surprise. "I wanted to surprise you. This old desk is not ergonomic at all, and it's probably giving you back pain. I've ordered a new, modern, height-adjustable one." "I didn't give you permission to change anything in my office," I said, trying to remain calm. She waved it away like an annoying fly. "Come on, Chester, you can't live in the past forever. This house needs updating, and your office needs it first. The desk belongs in a museum, not a house." "Put the desk back where it belongs," I said to the workers, who looked at each other uncertainly. "Don't listen to him," Brittany interjected with a smile that smelled cold. "Old people always resist change. Go on with your work." "This is my house, and I decide what I want to change," I said firmly. "Actually, it's our house now," Brittany countered, "and I have a say in it too. Rourke and I have discussed it, and he agrees it's time to make some changes." "You discussed changes to my office without me?" "We wanted it to be a surprise. Rourke knows you're conservative and will resist any changes, so he thought it would be easier this way." She smiled her fake smile again. "Trust us, Chester. We want what's best for you." In the end, I insisted, and the table was returned. But that was only the first battle in a long war. Gradually, the house began to change, not always with my consent. First, Edith's pictures from the living room disappeared. Brittany replaced them with modern abstract paintings, explaining that too many personal photos create an oppressive atmosphere. Then she rearranged the furniture, threw out the old floor lamp that Edith and I had bought during our first year of marriage, and replaced the curtains. Every time I expressed dissatisfaction, she parried with the same phrase. "Rourke agrees with me." And indeed, my son seemed to submit completely to his wife's will. He supported her every decision, even those that clearly hurt me. The house gradually ceased to be mine. All the things that reminded me of Edith disappeared one by one. Brittany even tried to remove her clothes from my bedroom closet, claiming that it's time to move on. "You need to start dating women your own age," she declared one day over breakfast. "The senior club is sure to have some suitable candidates." "I'm not interested in other women," I replied coldly. "It's unhealthy to cling to the past." She shook her head with feigned sympathy. "Edith has been gone 5 years, Chester. She would have wanted you to move on." Don't you dare speak for my wife. I rarely lost my temper, but at that moment I could barely contain myself. It wasn't just things that were a problem. Brittany was slowly changing the whole way of life in the house. My friends who used to visit often now felt uncomfortable under her gaze. She criticized their country manners and laughed at their stories, calling them senile nonsense. One day Patrick, an old friend of mine, came in as usual on Thursday night for a game of chess. Brittany met him at the door with a fake smile. "Chester's not feeling well tonight," she lied. "Maybe another time?" I heard this from the kitchen and walked out into the hallway. "I feel fine, Patrick. Come on in," I said, ignoring Brittany's angry look. She'd made quite a scene after Patrick left. "I'm trying to create a normal family atmosphere here, and you bring in your old people every single day," she yelled. "The house is turning into a nursing home. How can we start our family life if your friends are always hanging around?" "They're my friends, and they'll always be welcome here," I said firmly. "And if you don't like it, you can find another place to live." "We'll discuss it with Rourke," she threatened. And indeed, in the evening, my son came to me with a heart-to-heart talk. He looked tired and kind of faded. "Dad, Brittany's worried that there are too many strangers in the house," he began tentatively. "Maybe you could meet your friends somewhere else, a coffee shop or a park." "Son, can you hear yourself?" I looked him in the eye. "Are you suggesting I kick my friends out of my own house because your wife is uncomfortable?" "Brittany's just very sensitive to personal space," he muttered, averting his gaze. "She needs time to adjust." "What about my space?" and I asked. "I let you live in my house, but that doesn't mean I have to change the way I live." "Dad, you have to understand. Brittany and I need to build our family, our traditions. It's hard to do that with so many," he hesitated, "old." I realized my son wasn't just referring to things or friends. He was talking about me. I myself was the old that was getting in the way of their new life. Gradually, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. Brittany organized dinner parties for her co-workers and friends without asking my permission. They filled the house with loud conversations, laughter, and the smell of expensive perfume and cigarette smoke. They introduced me as Father Rourke, as if I were an appendix to the house rather than its master. One day I discovered that the key to my office was missing. When I asked Brittany about it, she feigned surprise. "So, why would you lock a room in your own house? What are you hiding in there, Chester?" "I value my privacy," I replied. "You know, there should be no secrets in a family." She shook her head with feigned disappointment. "Rourke thinks you're getting a little paranoid. It's normal at your age, but it might be worth seeing a specialist." I realized that the key was no longer to be found, so I changed the lock. This caused another scandal. Brittany said I didn't trust her, that I was undermining the family relationship by being suspicious. Rourke took her side again, but the final straw was the night I discovered that the deeds to the house and my will were missing from the safe in the study. I asked Rourke directly about it when we were alone together. "Son, did you take the papers from my safe?" He hesitated, and that was answer enough. Brittany wanted to see if everything was okay on the legal side. She's worried about the future." "What future?" I asked directly. Uh, well, if something happens to you, you're not young anymore, Dad, and we have to be prepared." I didn't let him finish. "The documents must be returned to the safe by tonight, and tell your wife that my personal belongings are none of her business." Rourke nodded, but I could see fear in his eyes. Not for me, for Brittany's reaction. The documents were back in the safe, but I noticed the scanning marks on them. They weren't folded the way I'd left them. It made me wonder what other plans my sister-in-law was making. And then today, after 3 months of this grueling war, things finally reached a boiling point. Brittany announced a family dinner. She cooked a gourmet meal, set the table in the living room instead of the kitchen where we usually ate, lit candles, and opened a bottle of expensive wine. "Are we having a party?" I asked, not understanding the reason for such solemnity. "You could say that," she smiled enigmatically. "Today is exactly 3 months since we have been living together. I think it's time to summarize some results." Dinner began relatively peacefully. Brittany asked Rourke about his work, shared her success in organizing some PR campaign. I ate in silence, watching them and feeling like an extra at this celebration of life. After the second glass of wine, Brittany got to the point of the evening. "Chester, Rourke and I have had a long discussion and decided it's time for some changes." she said in a businesslike tone, like a corporate meeting. It's getting harder and harder for you to take care of such a big house. We see how tired you get climbing the stairs, how hard it is for you to keep things in order. I'm doing just fine, I objected. There's no need to be brave, she smiled indulgently. We all get older. Anyway, we thought it would make more sense if you moved into the guest house in the garden. It's small, cozy, all on one level. No stairs. And we'd take care of the main house. I couldn't believe my ears. They were suggesting I move out of my own house into a small annex in the garden. The guest house was essentially a garden shed that I had converted into a small studio for visiting relatives. There was only one room with a kitchenette and a tiny bathroom. This is my home, I said slowly. I'm not going anywhere. Chester, be reasonable, Brittany frowned. You're 74 years old. At your age, it's dangerous to live alone in a big house. This way, we'll be around to keep an eye on you. I don't need looking after. That's what everyone says until they fall and break a hip, she laughed as if she'd said something funny. Besides, Rourke and I need more space. We're planning on kids and we're going to need extra rooms. Rourke's nursery is still upstairs, I pointed out. It's empty. One room isn't enough, Brittany said. We need a nursery, a playroom, my workroom. This house was designed for a family and you're using it alone. It's unsustainable. This house is mine, I said again, and I'm not moving anywhere. She glanced at Rourke, who was sitting with his eyes down on his plate, as if the conversation didn't concern him. Rourke, why don't you explain to your father? There was a note of steel in her voice. My son looked up at me tiredly. Dad, it actually makes sense. It'll be easier for you to take care of the small space, and we can start our own family life. In my house? I didn't hide my indignation. Our house, Brittany corrected me. Rourke is your only son and heir. In fact, he already owns this house. The house belongs to me as long as I live. I felt my blood boil at the insolence. But you're old, Chester, she said with such disdain that I flinched. You have to think about the future. We can't live forever in limbo, waiting for when I die? I finished for her. Don't twist it, she grimaced. I'm talking about the practical side of things. You're not old enough to make important decisions on your own. You need support, and we're ready to give it. But in return, we expect you to be understanding and accommodating. I looked at my son, searching his eyes for a glimmer of resistance. But all I saw was resignation. Rourke, do you agree with this? You really want to evict me from my own home? Dad, no one's evicting anyone, he said quietly, not looking me in the eye. We're just offering a better option for everyone. For everyone or for you? I asked directly. Stop being so dramatic. Brittany slammed her palm on the table. I'm trying to create a normal family atmosphere here, and you're resisting every step of the way. Your old-fashionedness and stubbornness are getting in the way of our life. This house is as stuck in the last century as you are. Brittany, Rourke said warningly, but she couldn't stop herself. No, let her know the truth. She raised her voice. For 3 months, I've put up with his quirks, his senile grumbling, his retired friends with their endless war stories. I've tried to create a cozy, modern home here, and he clings to every junk, every dusty trinket. It's unbearable. She finished her wine and continued, looking at me with undisguised contempt. You know what, Chester? I'm the mistress of this house now, and you, old man, you're going to live by my rules. Either move into the guest house, or we'll find you a good place in a nursing home. Rourke agrees with me, don't you, dear? My son sat as if paralyzed, unable to look at me or my wife. I rose slowly from the table. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking, but not with fear, with anger and determination. For the first time in years, I felt the strength I'd had as a young man, when I'd defended my country in Vietnam, when I'd built a business from the ground up, when I'd fought for Edith's life until my last breath. The house you live in, I said firmly, looking Brittany straight in the eye, does not belong to your husband, but to me. It has never been and never will be in Rourke's name as long as I live. And the way you're treating me in the memory of my wife, you don't belong here. Get ready to move. Brittany froze with her mouth open, not believing her ears. Her face, usually so confident and arrogant, was contorted with shock and rage. You can't, she squeezed out at last. Rourke, tell him. But his son remained silent. staring into the void before him, as if only now realizing what his life had become. You have 2 weeks to find a new place to live, I added, heading out of the room. And don't even think about questioning my decision. Unlike you, Brittany, I'm not bluffing. I walked out, leaving them in the living room, and went upstairs to my bedroom. My legs were shaking, but I felt unexpectedly light at heart. For the first time in 3 months, I felt in control of my life again, and I wasn't about to give up. The next morning was unusually quiet. I woke up earlier than usual before 6 and went down to the kitchen. To my surprise, no one was there. Usually by this time, Brittany was already bustling about, preparing her fancy avocado and quinoa breakfast. I brewed some coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the garden, which was slowly waking up to the rising sun. I didn't regret yesterday's confrontation. On the contrary, I felt satisfied that I'd finally expressed everything that had been building up for months. Maybe I should have done it sooner, not let the situation get this far. But now was the chance to make things right, to regain control of my own life and home. Around 8 in the morning, Rourke walked into the kitchen. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all. "Good morning," I said, pouring him a cup of coffee. He nodded, not looking at me, and sat down across from me. "Dad, we need to talk about yesterday. I'd been waiting for this conversation, and I was ready for it." "I'm listening." "What Brittany said." "She didn't mean it," he began uncertainly. "She was just overworked. Working, moving, adjusting. It's all exhausting." "She was pretty clear," I countered. "And this isn't the first time she's shown her true feelings about me in this house." Rourke ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd learned from me and always used when he was nervous. "She is truly sorry. We both are. Yesterday was a rough day. Everyone said too much," he paused. "But evicting us, it's a bit much, don't you think? I think I gave you a roof over your head when you needed it, and instead of gratitude, I got attempts to evict me from my own home," I said calmly but firmly. "This is not a matter of one hard day, Rourke. It's a matter of respect, which your wife obviously has neither for me nor for your mother's memory. She just doesn't understand some things." He looked almost pleading. "Sorry, Brittany grew up in a different environment. She has different values. Give her another chance, Dad. For me. What about you? I asked you straight up. Do you think I should move into the guest house and give you the house too?" Rourke lowered his eyes, and in that moment he looked like a little boy caught in a lie. "No, of course not. I never meant to evict you. But Dad, understand, our situation isn't easy." "What situation, Rourke?" I leaned in closer. "Maybe it's time you told me the truth." He sighed, and after a long pause, he began to speak. And what I heard confirmed my worst suspicions. It turned out that Rourke's financial problems were far more serious than he had previously admitted. After being laid off, he'd been living on savings that were quickly melting away. Then he started taking out loans, small at first, then bigger and bigger. By the time he met Brittany, his debt was already a significant amount. "And Brittany agreed to marry you, knowing your financial situation?" I asked, not hiding my skepticism. She said we could do it together," Rourke said quietly, as if he couldn't believe what he was saying. "Brittany offered to move in with you to save on rent and pay off the debt faster. But then she found out how much the house was worth," I finished for him. Rourke nodded, and it physically hurt me to realize how naive my son had been. "She started saying that if the house was in my name, we could get a loan against it and solve all our financial problems. Or sell it and buy 2 smaller homes, one for us and one for you. It all makes sense now." Brittany's interest in the paperwork, her insistence on updating the interior, increasing the market value, her talk about my advanced age and inability to live on my own. She was setting the stage to gain control of the house. "And you went along with this plan?" I asked, feeling cold inside at the thought of betraying my son. "No. I told her that the house belonged to you, and we had no right to demand anything. But she insisted that we should at least discuss that option." He rubbed his temples like he was getting a migraine. "I never meant for it to turn out this way, Dad. I swear." I looked at my son and saw him as a scared boy trapped in his own weakness. Maybe I really was too hard on him as a kid. Didn't teach him to stand up for himself, to make his own decisions? Or was his gentleness due to Edith, who always protected him from my demanding behavior? How much do you owe? I asked after a long pause. Rourke named the sum, and I whistled. It was substantial, but not insurmountable. I could have helped him, if only he'd asked sooner, before the whole Brittany thing. Why didn't you come to me? There was bitterness in my voice. I'm your father, Rourke. I've always been there for you. I didn't want to be a burden. He looked ashamed. You've been through enough since your mother died. And then, he stopped talking, but I realized what he wasn't telling me. And then Brittany came along and offered a different solution. I finished for him. Our conversation was interrupted by Brittany's appearance. She walked into the kitchen, looking completely different than usual. No makeup, her hair in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest sweater and jeans instead of her usual designer clothes. There was a look of remorse on her face, so feigned that I could barely contain a chuckle. Good morning, she said quietly, almost shyly. May I join you? I nodded, and she sat down next to Rourke, putting a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of support. Chester, I wanted to apologize for yesterday, she began, looking at me with moist eyes. I said some horrible things I never really thought I would. It was a moment of weakness, and I'm very, very sorry. I stared at her in silence, waiting for this play to continue. I never wanted to drive you out of the house, she continued. On the contrary, I wanted to create a warm family atmosphere here for all of us. Maybe I was too involved in the changes, didn't take your feelings into account. I admit my mistake, and I apologize. And you no longer think of me as a helpless old man who should be moved to the barn? I asked ironically, which she ignored. Of course not. I respect you, Chester. She put her hand on my palm in a false gesture of sincerity. You've done so much for Rourke, for this family. I've been ungrateful, and I'm asking you to give me a chance to make amends. I looked at my son, who was watching the scene with hope in his eyes, and I felt sorry for him. He really believed in his wife's sincerity, didn't see behind her beautiful words another manipulation. We can start over, Brittany suggested with a smile that seemed almost genuine now. I promise to be more considerate of your wishes and the traditions of this house. I knew she was lying, knew it was just a new tactic to stay in the house and continue her plan. But I also knew that Rourke wasn't ready to break off his relationship with her. He was too confused, too dependent. All right, I said after a long pause. Let's try it again. But on one condition, no changes to the house without my consent. No talk of moving or remodeling, and my friends can come visit anytime. Sure, Chester, she brightened, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Whatever you say, it's your home. Rourke looked relieved, as if a mountain had been lifted from his shoulders. Poor boy, he really thought it was all so easy. After breakfast, he left for work, and it was just Brittany and me. As soon as the door closed behind her son, her face changed. The mask of remorse fell away, giving way to cold calculation. I'm really sorry about last night, Chester, she said, but there was no trace of pleading in her voice now. It was a mistake of tactics. I was too hasty. At least you're honest now, I noted with a bitter chuckle. Always, she smiled her trademark shark smile. Let's dot the I's. I know you don't trust me, and frankly, I'm not crazy about you either. But Rourke loves us both, and for his sake, we have to find a way to coexist. Until you find a way to get rid of me? Oh, Chester, you're so dramatic, she laughed. I'm not going to kill you, if that's what you mean. I just think that, at your age, it's time to consider a more compact place to live. This conversation is over. I stood up, intending to leave. Not quite. She stopped me with a gesture. Did Rourke tell you about our financial problems? I nodded, seeing no point in denying it. Then you can see why it's so important for us to stay here. We can't afford to rent until we pay off our debts. I could help Rourke, I said. Of course you could, she nodded with feigned gratitude. But you want him to do it on his own, don't you? To be a real man, not a daddy-dependent boy. She knew just where to hit. Of course I wanted my son to be independent, strong, confident, but he hasn't been that way in a long time, and it's largely because of this woman. Give us time, Chester, Brittany continued. Let us stay here until we get back on our feet, and then I promise we'll find our own place. I looked at her questioningly. Why should I believe your promises? Because I'm going to play by your rules now. She shrugged. At least for now. That was the end of our conversation, but I knew this was just the beginning of a new phase of the war. Brittany hadn't abandoned her plans, she'd just changed tactics. Over the next few days, she exhibited exemplary behavior. She cooked my favorite meals, asked my opinion on all sorts of subjects, even offered to return Edith's pictures to the living room. Rourke was delighted with the change, believing that the crisis had passed and that now we could really live as one happy family. But I noticed something my son didn't. As soon as we were alone together, Brittany dropped her mask. Nothing overtly hostile, just a cold, appraising stare, snide remarks thrown in passing, hints about my age and state of health. She never gave up trying to undermine my self-confidence, to make me feel like a burden. And then came the most dangerous part. She began to turn Rourke against me, but she did it so subtly that he didn't even notice the manipulation. "Your father looks so tired today," she said with feigned concern. "Don't you think he should see a doctor? Maybe he has a heart problem or dementia?" Or, "I've noticed Chester's been forgetful lately. Yesterday he couldn't remember where he put his glasses, and today he forgot to turn off the gas. Is that normal for his age?" And Rourke, instead of dismissing these insinuations, began to worry. I could see the way his eyes changed when he looked at me, an anxiety in them, as if he expected me to go senile or die of a heart attack at any moment. One evening, he came into my office with papers in his hands. "Dad," I was thinking, "maybe we should get a power of attorney." He started off tentatively, "In case something happens to you and you can't make decisions for yourself." I looked at him in disbelief. "Something like your wife convincing you that I was on the verge of dementia?" He blushed but didn't back down. "No, of course not. It's just a sensible precaution. Brittany says that's what her family always did." "Her family," I repeated. "Not in ours. I'm in my right mind, Rourke, and I intend to stay that way for years to come. But if anything happens, I have a will and all the necessary papers with my lawyer," I said. "And believe me, I've thought of everything." He walked away disappointed, and I was left pondering how far Brittany's influence over my son had gone. She was methodically destroying our bond, driving a wedge between us, and doing it under the guise of caring for both of us. A week after our confrontation, I happened to overhear their conversation in the kitchen. I wasn't intending to eavesdrop. I was just walking by and stopped when I heard my name. "He's getting more and more suspicious," Brittany said. "Have you noticed how he's watching my every move?" "It's not normal, Rourke. He's just worried about his home," replied the son. "Give him time to get used to it." "Time?" There was anger in her voice. "How much more time do we have to live as tenants in a house that should rightfully belong to you? You're his only son. It's his house, Brittany. He earned it. He paid the mortgage. And you are his heir." She wouldn't give up. "He won't even talk to you about his plans for the house. Are you sure he hasn't decided to sign it over to some cat shelter? Dad never—" "You don't know what's in his head," she interrupted. "Old people can be very strange, especially when they live alone. Maybe he's already made a will for his friend Patrick, or that nurse at the clinic who flirts so sweetly with him." "Brittany, come on," Rourke's voice sounded tired. "I'm just saying we need to be sure about the future. We have debts, Rourke, huge debts, and our only hope is this house." "We'll get through this," he said, but without much confidence. "How?" Her voice became sharper. "Your new job barely covers the interest on your loans. We'll never get out of debt if we just go with the flow. We need a plan. We need guarantees." I didn't listen any further and quietly went to my office. Now I knew for sure that Brittany hadn't given up on her plans. She had simply chosen a different path, through her son, through his fears and insecurities. And I knew I had to do something about it before it was too late, before my son finally became a puppet in the hands of this calculating woman. After overhearing the conversation, I began to watch Brittany and Rourke more closely. Their behavior increasingly alarmed me. Brittany continued to play the role of caring daughter-in-law in my presence. But as soon as I left the room, her voice changed, becoming harsh and demanding. Rourke, on the other hand, seemed more and more nervous, avoided direct conversation with me, and hardly made eye contact. One morning when they were both gone, Rourke to work and Brittany to some business meeting, I decided to do a little investigating. I usually respected other people's space and never went into their room uninvited. But my intuition told me it was time to break that rule. Their bedroom, the former guest room, was now redone to Brittany's taste. Minimalist furniture, cool gray-blue tones, no personal photos or memorabilia. I looked around, not knowing exactly what I was looking for. A closet with Brittany's perfectly hung outfits, a dresser with makeup, a bedside table with the self-development book she'd been defiantly reading in the evenings. On a table by the window stood Brittany's laptop. I knew it was password protected, but her work folder of documents was lying next to it. I opened it, feeling a prick of conscience. It was an invasion of privacy after all, but my unease was quickly replaced by shock. The folder contained printouts of advertisements for houses for sale in our neighborhood, with handwritten notes, similar to ours, sold for, same year built, worth. Among them was a sheet with sketches of the budget, where in the column of income was the amount, amazingly close to the market value of my house. But the real discovery was a folder labeled Plan CB. Inside, I found a neatly organized document entitled Inheritance Strategy. With each paragraph I read, my heart clenched tighter and tighter. Brittany had put together a detailed plan of action in the event of my death. It outlined the steps to sell the house quickly, the anticipated profit, and investment options for the proceeds. One of the points explicitly stated, the sale should be made as soon as possible after CB's death, while Rourke is emotionally vulnerable and not inclined to resist. It went on to say, the need to convince CB to rewrite the will in favor of Rourke, to rewrite the will in Rourke's favor, an alternative means of obtaining control of the estate in the event of CB's incapacity. At the end of the document was a handwritten comment. Power of attorney option is a priority. Get it signed by the end of the month. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling my insides grow cold. This wasn't just a plan, it was a strategy to seize my assets. And from the looks of it, my own son was, if not complicit, at least aware of these plans. After taking a few pictures of the documents on my phone, I carefully put everything back where it belonged and left the room. I needed advice, and I knew who to turn to. Franklin Whitley had been a friend of mine since his military service. After Vietnam, he had gone to law school, and now, despite his advanced age, he continued to advise on legal matters. We met every Wednesday at the Veterans Club, but today was only Monday. The situation was urgent. I called him, and to my relief, Franklin agreed to meet the same day. We agreed to have lunch at a small restaurant in the business center, away from the house. I didn't want to risk a chance encounter with Brittany or her acquaintances. Franklin listened to my story with his characteristic calm. He looked at the pictures on my phone, asked a few clarifying questions, and finally leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table, a gesture he always used when he was thinking about a complex problem. The situation is serious, Chester, he said at last. What your sister-in-law is doing could be characterized as an attempted fraud, especially these plans to have you declared incompetent. What is your advice? I asked, although deep down I already knew the answer. First, change the will immediately, he spoke like a lawyer now, clear and to the point. If you don't want Rourke and his wife to have the house, you'll have to make that clear in the document. But he's my only son, I objected. Who else can I leave my inheritance to? There are options, Franklin began to list. You can set up a trust with certain conditions. For example, Rourke would only get the house after he divorces Brittany, or you could bequeath the house to a charitable organization and leave Rourke financial compensation. I've been thinking. The idea of disinheriting my son seemed too cruel, but leaving the house to Brittany was even worse. Edith had put her heart and soul into it, and the thought of selling it after my death was unbearable. There's another aspect to the problem, Franklin continued. You need to protect yourself against possible attempts to have you declared incompetent. I would recommend a full medical examination right now to document your excellent mental health. Do you think they can go that far? I asked, although after reading Plan CB, I didn't doubt the answer. Judging by the documents, your daughter-in-law is ready for a lot. Franklin was ruthlessly honest. And the second question is, what to do about them living in your house? I sighed. This is the moment of truth. I want them to move out, I said firmly. But Rourke, he's my son, Frank, and he's got real financial problems, which shouldn't be your problem. My friend shook his head. Look, Chester, I know you love your son, but sometimes the best help is to let a man face the consequences of his decisions, including the decision to tie his life to this woman. He was right, and I knew it, but that didn't make it any easier. What about an official eviction? I asked. What's the procedure? Given that you don't have a formal lease, you can just give them notice to vacate the premises. Usually you have 30 days. If they refuse, you'll have to go to court, but I doubt it will come to that. We discussed the details, and by the end of the meeting, I had a clear plan of action. Franklin promised to prepare all the necessary documents in the next few days, and we agreed to meet again. Returning home, I felt a strange mixture of determination and bitterness. In my entire life, I had never imagined that I would be forced to officially evict my own son. Where had I gone wrong in his upbringing? Why had he grown up so weak, unable to resist the manipulations of a calculating woman? At home, I was in for an unpleasant surprise. Rourke and Brittany were sitting in the living room, accompanied by a man in a business suit I'd never seen before. "Oh, there you are, Dad." Rourke looked nervous. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Harris, gerontology specialist." "Gerontology?" I asked, feeling a chill go down my spine. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell." The man stood up and extended his hand. "I specialize in the health of the elderly. Your son and his wife have expressed concern about your condition." "My condition," I repeated, not hiding my sarcasm. "And what are their specific concerns?" Dr. Harris looked slightly embarrassed. "They noted some signs that might indicate the early stages of cognitive impairment. Forgetfulness, mood changes, suspiciousness." "Suspicious," I nodded, looking directly at Brittany, who was doing her best to act worried. I wondered why I'd become suspicious. "See, doctor?" She turned to the specialist. "He immediately becomes hostile, even though we only want to help." I looked at my son, who was avoiding my gaze. "Rourke, was it your idea or hers?" I asked bluntly. "Dad, we're both worried," he said quietly, unsure. "You've gotten forgetful, sometimes mixing up the days of the week." "When have I ever gotten the days of the week mixed up?" I demanded an answer. "Last week you thought it was Thursday when it was Wednesday," Brittany interjected. "And you couldn't find your glasses, even though they were right in front of you." I remembered that incident. The glasses were on the table, but Brittany didn't mention that she'd moved them there, even though I always left them on the bedside table. "Dr. Harris," I addressed the specialist, trying to speak calmly and rationally. "I appreciate your concern, but I assure you that there is nothing wrong with my cognitive health. I just got back from the attorney with whom I discussed the changes to my will. If you'd like, I can show you the notes from our meeting, which I took from memory without prompting." Brittany tensed when she heard about the will. "What changes to the will?" she asked, unable to hide her alarm. "It's confidential," I answered, looking her straight in the eye. "But I can tell you that I am very careful about the inheritance of my estate." Dr. Harris seemed to feel uncomfortable being in the middle of a family conflict. "Perhaps I should come another time, when the situation is more calmer," he suggested, rising. "No need, doctor." I shook my head. "I'm perfectly willing to undergo any examination right now, but on one condition: the results will be sent directly to me and my lawyer, bypassing my son and his wife." Brittany clearly hadn't expected this. "But we're family," she objected. "We have a right to know about your condition." "That's why I'm suggesting you get a checkup," I countered, "to allay your fears." After Dr. Harris left, promising to contact me to schedule a formal examination, it was just the three of us. The atmosphere was tense to the extreme. "Why did you change your will?" Rourke asked directly. "Why did you invite a specialist in senile dementia without my knowledge?" I answered question for question. "We were worried." Brittany went back into caring daughter-in-law mode. "Your behavior lately—" "My behavior is completely appropriate to the situation," I interrupted. "Especially considering what I found in your work folder today, Brittany." She turned pale but quickly pulled herself together. "You went through my stuff?" Her voice turned icy. "That's an invasion of privacy. And planning to sell my house right after my death is what?" I couldn't hold back. "Plan BB is a pretty transparent acronym, don't you think?" Rourke looked confused. "What's he talking about?" he asked, looking at his wife. "I have no idea." She shrugged her shoulders with feigned incomprehension. "Apparently this paranoia is more serious than we thought. Don't try to make me look crazy." I pulled out my phone and showed my son the pictures of the documents. Here, see for yourself. Your wife has made a detailed plan to sell the house after my death. She's even considering declaring me incompetent so she can get control of the property while I'm still alive. Rourke looked at the photos, his face growing more and more shocked with each frame. Brittany, what is this? His voice shook. They're just drafts. She tried to keep her composure. I work with real estate. I do budget planning. These are all hypothetical scenarios. The sale should be made as soon as possible after CB's death while Rourke is emotionally vulnerable. I quoted. A very hypothetical scenario, isn't it? Brittany realized it was futile to deny and abruptly changed tactics. Okay, yes, I've planned our financial strategy for the future. She was now addressing Rourke, ignoring me completely. But only because we're in desperate straits. We have huge debts that your father could easily cover, but instead he'd rather watch us drown. I offered to help, I reminded you, but not on your terms. What terms? Rourke was now completely confused. Your wife wants me either dead or incapacitated, I said bluntly. In either case, you will get the house, which she will sell immediately. That's not true, Brittany shouted, but her eyes betrayed her panic. I was just considering all the options. It's called planning. Rourke looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. Did you really write about emotional vulnerability? He asked quietly. Brittany realized she'd lost this round, and she changed tactics abruptly. Yes, I did. She wasn't pretending anymore. Because you're weak, Rourke. You've never been good at making tough decisions. Someone had to take care of our future, and that someone was me. I watched this scene with a heavy heart. My son looked completely crushed, and I could almost physically feel his pain. I thought you loved me, he said so quietly that Brittany had to lean in to hear. I do, she exclaimed, but her voice sounded coldly calculating rather than passionate. But love doesn't pay the bills, Rourke. We need money, stability, a future. At the expense of my father's death? He looked up at her, shocked. He's old anyway. She cut him off, losing the last vestiges of pretense. What's wrong with us inheriting what should rightfully be yours? It's the natural order of things. There was a heavy silence. I looked at my son, waiting for his reaction, and I could see the love for this woman and the shock of realizing her true nature struggling in his eyes. I think we all need to calm down, Rourke finally said, rising. I need to think. He left the room, and Brittany and I were alone. She was staring at me with undisguised hatred. You ruined everything, she hissed. We could have had a good deal. You could have lived out your days in peace, and we could have taken care of the house. Amicably, I grinned bitterly. Your definition of nice is very peculiar, Brittany. She got up to leave, but I stopped her. I've changed the will. The house will never be yours, even if you stay with Rourke. And you have 2 weeks to move out. I've prepared a formal eviction notice. You can't do this to your own son. She clenched her fists in anger. I'm doing this for my son, I replied calmly, and it's probably the best thing I've done for him. When Brittany left, I sat in the empty living room for a long time, thinking about what had happened. The pain of realizing that my own son had allowed this woman to plan my death or incapacitation was unbearable. But it was even more painful to see him torn between his loyalty to me and his feelings for her. I pulled an old photograph out of my desk drawer. Rourke at 5 years old on my shoulders, both of us laughing, happy and carefree. Where had those times gone? When did we become such strangers to each other? That night I drew up the official eviction notice, as Franklin and I had agreed. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was necessary not only for my protection, but for Rourke's as well. He needed to break free of this woman's influence, even if it meant going through pain and loss. I didn't know if my son would ever forgive me for that decision, but I firmly believed I was doing the right thing, protecting not only myself and the memory of Edith, but Rourke himself from his own weakness. The next morning after the revelation of Brittany's plans, there was an oppressive silence in the house. Rourke had gone to work earlier than usual without breakfast. Brittany locked herself in her bedroom, pretending to work remotely. I sat in the kitchen, rereading the eviction notice I'd prepared the day before. 2 copies, one for Rourke and one for Brittany, an official document, giving them 14 days to vacate the premises. Franklin assured me that legally everything was flawless. They weren't tenants in the classic sense. They hadn't paid me. They hadn't signed a contract. In fact, they were guests whom I had every right to ask to leave. I decided to serve the notice in the evening, when they would both be home. The day dragged on for an agonizingly long time. I tried to distract myself by reading, taking a walk, even calling Patrick to discuss plans for a game of chess. But my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation. How would Rourke react? Would he realize that I wasn't doing this out of revenge, but for his own good? Or would he turn his back on me, choosing my wife's side? Around 6 p.m., I heard the sound of the door opening, and Rourke came back. An hour later, Brittany came in, and judging by the sound of her heels on the stairs, she went straight up to the bedroom. I gave them time to change their clothes and gather their thoughts, then called them both into the living room. They entered warily, as if expecting a catch. Brittany looked as perfect as ever, not a hair out of place, her makeup flawless, but there was anxiety in her eyes. Rourke, on the other hand, looked haggard, his face slack, his eyes red from sleep, his shoulders slumped. "Have a seat," I said, pointing to the couch. They sat down next to each other, but not close. There was tension between them. A good sign, I thought. It means Rourke still has his doubts. "I've been thinking about this situation for a long time," I began, trying to speak calmly and judiciously. "And I've come to the conclusion that it's better for us to separate." Brittany moved forward, ready to object, but I stopped her with a gesture. "Let me finish. After last night, it's obvious to me that we can't live under the same roof. Trust is broken, and there's no way to rebuild it." "Dad," Rourke finally looked up at me, "what you found, it's not what you think. Brittany's just—" "Let's not lie to each other, son," I interrupted gently. "We all know it was exactly what it seemed, a plan to gain control of my house after I'm dead or incapacitated." "You've got it all wrong," Brittany exclaimed, going into outraged innocence mode. "I was just analyzing possible scenarios. That's part of my job. I would never—" "That's enough," I raised my hand. "I don't want to hear another lie. Here," I handed them the envelopes with the notices. "An official demand to vacate the premises within 14 days. Brittany jumped up, her face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. We're family." She turned to Rourke. "Tell him. This is your home, too." Rourke took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. "Dad, you can't seriously want this," he said quietly. "I can and I do," I said firmly. "This is my house. I built it, I paid for it, and I decide who lives in it." "But I'm your son." There was resentment in his voice. "Yes, you are my son," I sighed. "And that's why it pains me so much to see what your life has become. You let that woman," I nodded toward Brittany, "manipulate you, turn you against your own father, plan my death." "I never planned your death," Brittany shrieked. "This is slander. I'm going to sue." "Go ahead," I shrugged. "I have pictures of your documents, witness statements, and a great lawyer. It's going to be a very interesting trial." She was silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Rourke looked completely lost. "Where shall we go?" he asked in a lifeless voice. "We don't have any money for rent." "I have a suggestion," I said, softening. "I'm willing to help you financially, Rourke. Pay for your move, put a down payment on your rent, even help you with your debts. But on one condition." "What's that?" He looked up at me with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "You go to a financial counselor and a therapist," I answered bluntly. "You need help, son. Professional help." Brittany laughed, cold and contemptuous. "That's it. You want to control him like you've been controlling him his whole life." She turned to Rourke. "See? He thinks you're weak, inferior. He's always thought that." I could see that her words had struck a nerve with Rourke. That's what she was counting on. His old complexes and insecurities. "I don't think you're weak," I said, looking my son straight in the eye. "I think you're under the influence of a woman who doesn't love you, but uses you, and I want to help you out of that trap." Rourke sat with his head down, clearly torn between the two forces pulling him in different directions. "We need to talk in private," I said, nodding toward the study. "Without her." Brittany jumped up immediately. "Don't even think about it," she hissed. "Rourke and I are family. We have no secrets from each other." "That's not for you to decide," I said calmly. "Rourke, My son rose slowly, not looking at his wife. I'll talk to my father. If you leave this room now, you don't have to come back. Brittany turned to shouting. It's your choice, Rourke. It's either me or him. Rourke froze and then, to my relief, headed for the study door. I followed him, leaving Brittany seething with rage in the living room. In the study, we sat across from each other, just like the old days when I'd help him with his homework or explain why he shouldn't skip school. She's not who she says she is, I began bluntly. You saw the paperwork? She was planning on using you to get my house. You don't understand, Rourke shook his head. Brittany is just being practical. She's thinking about the future. Her future, not yours, I countered. Rourke, look at you. You've changed since she came into your life. You're nervous, insecure, constantly seeking her approval. It's not a healthy relationship. You just don't understand her, he repeated stubbornly, but his voice wasn't as confident as before. Then explain it to me, I leaned forward. Explain to me why your wife was planning to sell the house right after I died. Why was she considering declaring me incompetent? Why did she try to isolate me from my friends, change my habits, control my life? Rourke was silent, unable to find an answer. Son, I'm not asking you to choose between us, I continued more gently. Sakanon, I'm asking you to face the truth. She's using you, and she'll keep using you as long as she needs you. She loves me, he mumbled, but he sounded unconvinced. Does she? I shook my head. Remember how you met her? You were in a vulnerable position, lost your job, struggling financially. The perfect target for a woman like her. He looked up at me, and there was pain in his eyes. What do I do, Dad? I'm confused. Walk away from her, I said simply. Start your life over. I'll help you with money, get you a good therapist, a financial counselor. You can get back on your feet. Rourke was silent for a long time, pondering my words. I could see that he was struggling internally, and I hoped that reason would win out over emotional dependence. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked up at me tiredly. I can't, Dad. I can't just walk away from her. Why not? I didn't hide my disappointment. Because, he hesitated, trying to find the words. Because I really love her, no matter what. And then she's right about one thing. I'm weak. I've always been weak. You know that. You're not weak, Rourke, I shook my head. You're just confused. You let her convince you of your own weakness. No, Dad, I've always been like that, he said bitterly. Always looking for approval, always afraid to make decisions. You wanted me to be strong like you, but I'm not. I never have been. His words hurt me almost physically. Had I been so wrong in raising my son? So pressured him with my expectations that he grew up with an inferiority complex? I love you just the way you are, son, I said quietly. I always have. And all I want now is for you to be happy. Really happy. Not dependent on a woman who manipulates your fears. Maybe you're right about Brittany. He suddenly smiled a sad smile. Maybe she really is using me. But you know what, Dad? I don't care. She makes me feel needed. She gives me a purpose, a direction, even if that purpose is just to serve her interests. I looked at my son and I didn't recognize him. Where is that smart, ambitious boy who dreamed of changing the world? When did he turn into this broken man willing to settle for being a puppet? That's not love, Rourke, I said, feeling a lump come up in my throat. It's an addiction, an unhealthy, destructive addiction. Maybe, he shrugged, but it's all I have. We walked back to the living room, where Brittany was pacing impatiently. When she saw our faces, she realized that I hadn't been able to change Rourke's mind. Have you had enough to talk about? She asked with ill-concealed triumph. Have you made up your mind? We'll leave, as you demand, Rourke said without looking at me. We'll find another place to live. But the terms of assistance still apply, I added. I'll help with the move and the down payment if you agree to counseling. We don't need your help, Brittany jumped up. We can handle this on our own. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my son, I cut her off. Rourke? He stood with his head down, clearly unwilling to choose between us. I'll think about your offer, he said at last. But now we must find lodgings. You have 14 days. I nodded at the envelopes of notices that were still on the coffee table. I hope that's enough time. Brittany grabbed her envelope, ripped it open defiantly, and threw the scraps on the floor. "Go to hell, old man," she hissed, losing the last vestiges of her composure. "You're going to regret this. Both of us," she nodded at Rourke, "are going to make you regret it." With those words, she ran out of the room, slamming the door loudly. Rourke stood looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of regret, shame, and perhaps relief. "I'm sorry for her," he said quietly. "She's just upset." "You deserve better, son," I replied, feeling my heart clench with pain. "And one day you'll realize that." He nodded, picked up his envelope, and walked out without looking back. The next 2 weeks passed in tense anticipation. Rourke and Brittany were hardly ever home, looking for a new place to live, I assumed. When we did cross paths, the atmosphere was so oppressive that I preferred to retreat to the study or go for a walk. Brittany defiantly ignored me, and if she spoke, it was only in barbs. Rourke remained aloof, absorbed in his own thoughts. I tried several times to talk to him alone, but he avoided long conversations. 3 days before the notice period expired, Rourke told me that they had found an apartment and were moving in that weekend. "It's small, but it'll do for the first time," he said, looking me in the eye for the first time in a long time. "Yeah, I got a second job in the evenings. It won't be easy, but we'll manage." "My offer to help still stands," I reminded him. "No strings attached if you're not ready for counseling." He shook his head. "Thanks, Dad, but we have to do this on our own." Brittany was right about one thing. It was time for me to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. The day of the move, I purposely left the house so I wouldn't get in the way or create additional stress. When I returned in the evening, I found the house empty and unusually quiet. They had taken only personal belongings, leaving all the furniture and appliances behind. On the kitchen table were the keys and a short note from Rourke. "Thanks for everything. I'll call you." I sat down in the chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. On the one hand, I had finally regained control of my own life and home. On the other, I had lost my son, possibly forever. But I didn't regret the decision. Sometimes you have to go through pain to break an impasse. Rourke had to realize for himself what an unhealthy relationship he was in and find the strength to change his life. I couldn't do that for him, no matter how much I wanted to. I spent the next few days restoring the house. Put back on the walls the pictures of Edith that Brittany had hidden in the closet. I put the memorabilia, the books, the collections back in their places. The house gradually returned to its former state, warm, cozy, filled with memories. Rourke called a week later. The conversation was short and restrained. He said that they were settling into their new place, that he was doing well. I didn't ask about Brittany, and he didn't mention her name. "I'm thinking about your offer," he said before saying goodbye. "About counseling. Maybe you're right, and I need help." It was a small ray of hope, and I decided to hold on to it. Life was slowly falling into a new direction. I resumed my weekly get-togethers with friends that Brittany had effectively banned. Patrick came over again on Thursdays for a game of chess. Franklin stopped by on Saturdays and we discussed politics and new books. I even joined a group of veterans who did volunteer work at the local animal shelter. One day, while sorting through old things in the garage, I came across a stamp album that I had started collecting in my youth, but had abandoned for lack of time. Turning the yellowed pages, looking at the colorful miniatures from different parts of the world, I felt the long-forgotten excitement of a collector. The next day, I visited the Philatelic Club, which I had learned about from the local newspaper. There I was greeted with such warmth and enthusiasm that I immediately felt part of the community. Stamp collecting became my new hobby, filling the void left by my son's passing. I also decided to take on the garden, which I had kept in only minimal order since Edith's death. Now, with enough time and energy, I could implement some of the ideas we had once discussed with her. I planted new rose bushes, her favorite, created a small pond with lilies, and built a gazebo for summer evenings. Working in the garden brought not only physical satisfaction, but also peace of mind. Sometimes while trimming the hedges or weeding the beds, I talked to Edith as if she were beside me. I told her about Rourke, about my worries and hopes, asked her for advice, and it seemed to me that through the rustling of the leaves, through the singing of the birds, she answered me. Rourke called regularly now, once a week. Our conversations became more and more open. He told me that he'd started seeing a therapist, first secretly from Brittany, then openly, despite her protests. "You were right, Dad," he said in one conversation. "This relationship isn't healthy. I'm starting to realize that. I didn't push. I didn't demand immediate solutions. I just supported him, reminded him that I loved him and would always be there for him, no matter what he decided." Today, 2 months after they left, I sit in the garden enjoying the warm spring evening. My home has become a refuge again, a place where I feel safe and secure. I am no longer alone. I have friends, hobbies, plans for the future. I don't know if Rourke will ever come back, if he'll be able to break free of Brittany's influence. But I've done my best, and now the decision is his. Sometimes you have to lose something to find yourself. I lost my son, hopefully temporarily, but I gained freedom, dignity, and a new meaning to life. And for that, I'm grateful, even to Brittany and her devious plans. She unwittingly forced me to shake up, to step out of my comfort zone, to take action. At 74, my life doesn't end. It just takes on new colors. And I intend to live it fully, honorably, according to my own rules. As Edith would say, as long as you're breathing, you can start again. And I am.